He's filling in. He and Joy will fill in while Nita and Stephen's sister are in Italy, starting May the 6th or the 17th. So, and then we're going to be gone. Joy and I'll be gone that next weekend, and so ourselves. But you will have that. But now you were talking that a while ago. I ran across something this morning I never knew existed. Did you know that there is a Freedom from Religion Foundation?
I don't doubt it.
Freedom from religion?
Yeah.
I'm sure I've heard of it.
And they have a lawsuit
Uh-oh.
against the coach and the University of South Carolina's women's basketball because she gives devotionals to her players and writes all this and has prayer before they play and all that. So they're suing the University of South Carolina.
Do they have to participate? That would be if they have to
So
participate.
there's a whole bunch, but I never heard of FFRF. In other words, Freedom from Religion Foundation, and it's an organization.
We prayed every time before a basketball game.
Sure.
It's the only sport we had is basketball, but we prayed.
Well, when we were out at Concord, I used to have to do prayer with the team for Lone Oak Jackrabbits, and we got ostracized. I mean, we had people to take us to task and saying, you can't do that.
At the Bologna School football teams, the announcer goes, I'd like to turn it over to such and such a student. And the student could open with prayer, but the announcer could not.
That's right.
That satisfied that.
It did.
Yeah. So
For the week, anyway.
This has been years ago, because we've been here 20 years, and that was back then.
Well,
This is a very good example of how the Supreme Court gets it wrong.
Yeah.
If you read the Constitution, the First Amendment,
But that we've got a whole
not be abridged.
we got a whole group of folks that are interpreting the Constitution in a different
Incorrectly, in my opinion.
And now what you would have, when I was a kid growing up, that would have never come about, but now it has. So
No, I know.
anyway, it goes back to where we are. Don't believe a word of it.
Don't believe it. I love it.
I love it too.
What did you think about his story of the sixth grader?
I've either read this when I was looking at this book online, or I was like, I just heard this story, and I'm like, wow, where was that?
Well,
I loved it.
There's one that goes back years, and you wonder about it. But it involved a teacher, and there was a class that literally was the most unrowdy group that they'd ever seen. The class was bad that even the substitute teachers began not wanting to go to that class.
That happens now a lot of it.
They burn out 2 different teachers in one semester. And so the district called the teacher to apply for the job that hadn't made the cut that year. In other words, the teacher did not make it. So that teacher, they said, okay, we want you now, all right. So she took over the class, and all of a sudden there was no unrowdiness. There was nothing going on. And so the principal, it was more than he could stand. And so the principal went with her in his amazements. The students were well behaved. They respected him when he came into class. They were enthusiastic. And so they had filed out of the classroom after class was over, and the superintendent asked the teacher this question in his amazement. He wanted to know, he hemmed and hawed around a bit, trying to get what words to say to her about it. But he wanted to know, that he really deserved, what has happened. And she laughed. Here her words were, you see, I discovered your little secret, talking to the principal. On my first day here, I looked in the desk drawer and found the list of the students' IQ scores.
That's what?
IQ scores.
Oh.
And I knew I had a challenged group of kids, she said, when I came here. So bright and rambunctious that I would really have had to work to make school interesting for them because they were too intelligent.
Oh, that happens.
So she slid open the drawer while the principal was there, pulled out the classroom list, and says, "Thank you for putting all their IQs by their names." They were their locker numbers. And he says, "Those aren't the IQ scores. Those are their locker numbers." Too late. The teacher had already expected the students to be bright and gifted. And they responded positively to what she did, like the sixth grader did to that teacher. You know, it was amazing. And so you see, that's thanks to teachers. You see, when I got to reading that, I got to thinking about the fact being is the world has a way of giving what is demanded of it. And as we look at, and it's, think about it for yourself. You do what is demanded of you, without a doubt. And if you are frightened and you look for a future and whatever you have in your life, you will get them, no matter how hard. It's like the young man told me down at Cummins Prison Farm, down there. I am where my father said I would be.
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, and so these teachers are doing that, and you know, if you expect victory, then you'll get a victory, and that was what was happening with the South Carolina basketball coach. That she was expecting victory. She lost only one ball game. Did you realize that? That team's only lost one ball game in like 3 years. And when you look at it, and when they interviewed her, she give all the credit to God, and the announcer didn't want to even interview her after she started talking about that. But it was there, and so that was what I was thinking about. He says, "Don't believe a word of it." Well, those teachers didn't believe what they had been given as instructions on this bunch of unruly kids that they were there. And also like this teacher talking to that sixth grader who wound up being, what, a PhD? A professor?
Yeah.
And so we look at that. So what are your thoughts? What were your thoughts about the sixth grader and about the teacher? Did you have any you know, did you have, in our life, we have to have positive expectancy. And that's what I think Mark is really coming around talking about when he was saying the reckless abandonment, all right? When you have reckless abandon, that means you are moving forward come hell or high water, all right? You're not going to let anything get in your way. And that's where it winds up doing. And so...
I'd always had gifted kids, and I'd taught probably for about 6 or 7 years. And I had this one group that, I mean, some of those kids got full ride scholarships to MIT when they graduated with honors from Central High School. They were doctors, lawyers, I mean, you know, all kinds of things. And I was so frustrated because I just seemed to bore them all the time. And I will never forget, or will be able to thank this teacher, Barbara Harrison. She said, "Lola, you know what your problem is?" And I said, "No." She says, "You're trying to lead them. Let them lead you."
Oh, there you go.
Wise words.
Yeah. Wisest words I ever heard. And then I found out it works with everybody, even the really, really low kids. They will, if you will listen, and that's hard for some people, especially me. If you will listen, they will eventually reveal what they need. But you have to be smart enough to figure it out. I mean, you can't just, you know.
Yeah, that was what I was writing about this morning on my morning blog, is the fact that awareness. What are we aware of? You know, you've seen situations where some of the trainings that some of us have had to go through is you walk through a room and then you come out and tell us all you saw.
Oh, yeah.
How aware of you, everything around you. How aware, Joy and I, we were not aware that people were driving by seeing our lawn and the azaleas blooming and the dogwoods blooming until the lady knocked on our door and said, "Your lawn is the yard of the month."
Wow.
And we said, "What?" And so, so but we were not seeing the forest for the trees. And that happens to us. And that's like the children. It's sort of like the first question he asked in here. He says, what was your least and most favorite grade in school?
Oh.
Mine was in college.
Yours was in college, okay. Anyway, was that your most favorite or your least favorite?
Most favorite.
Oh, most favorite. Well, what was your least favorite?
My least favorite was probably, I was in a class that was 6th and 5th grade, and the 6th graders and the 5th graders, I was the 5th grader, so we were just trash, basically, to the 6th grader. Yes.
Well, when I went to school, we had the 2nd and 3rd grade together in school. And I had a friend that was so smart. Kenan was just brilliant. He was in the 2nd grade, and they immediately promoted him to
He was
the
a
3rd
third grader.
So but materially, he was a year behind us. All right, but he was years ahead of us in his intelligence. But it was an interesting thing about it.
My first year of teaching, I taught at Northside Christian Academy. It's right across the freeway from McCain Mall.
Yeah.
I saw the tornado come down.
Oh, yeah.
And almost get McCain Mall.
Yeah.
But I had kindergarten through 5th grade, 18 students. It was Little House on the Prairie.
I bet. Wow.
Which just had its 50th anniversary.
Oh, well.
Yeah, I did so. But that was a challenging year, and
Yeah. So but that was you as a teacher. But you
well, it
know,
was a challenging year for them too.
oh, I'm sure it was. But then also, who was your favorite teacher?
Oh, that's a
Dr. Culpepper. That
Dr.
was my
Culpepper. All right. Who else?
I had a
Professor.
4th grade teacher. Second was awful. It was 2 different schools in Little Rock because of the 4th grade was sweet, kindest, nicest, and then moving to the 5th grade, and she was well known to just be just mean. And she was, and she would stand up and she would say, "I wish that y'all were all like," and I can name his name, but it wouldn't matter. I have no idea why aren't y'all like him?
Yeah.
I bet he hated that.
Of course he did.
Oh, he did, except he carried briefcase to school.
Oh.
In the 4th grade?
Yeah.
5th grade?
And he was smart. He was very smart, and I'm sure he probably made it all the way, you know. But nonetheless, and I found out later at our reunions, I wasn't the only one, but that teacher made me feel so bad that everybody else, we got together and we were laughing and talking about her. She was so mean, and what the boys did to try to trip her up.
Well, there you go. Isn't that the
But
truth?
she was pretty mean. But then my high school chemistry teacher made all the difference for me in something that I was really struggling with. And so she's a favorite.
Yeah, I can remember being in college and the calculus professor coming by me in the grill and says, "You need to come to my office because you didn't get this equation correct." Well, we come to find out she'd written the wrong negative instead of a positive in the equation. But she found it, and it wasn't, it was one of those things. But you do that.
Y'all know who my favorites are. My favorite in 6th grade was Miss Cook.
Oh, yeah.
Ida Cook. Let me tell you,
I had her too.
even Wild Man Steve Wilson talks about her with great pride.
And Mr. Cook, Coach Cook,
Yep, Coach Cook.
when I was in the 8th grade, down here in the Baptist church.
Do you know where their house was?
Yes. Where the post
Yeah.
Right where South Loop comes through between the school and the post office.
Yeah.
That's where their home was.
Yeah. And she hated they tore that down just for a road. That was her house.
She was. I can understand why you would. I only knew her as a parishioner, but she was such an elegant and sweet lady. She reminded me a lot of my 4th grade teacher, Ms. Williams. Ms. Williams always dressed to the nines.
Mm-hmm.
She was overly polite. And she would sit, because when we were in school, you had to sit on a table, and your teacher sat in the cafeteria where you ate. And I can remember she would repeatedly chew everything 20 times before she would swallow.
Some people do.
It's like my brother.
And I was just always fascinated by her. I mean, because, a bunch of boys are around the table. Well, we could scoff up our lunch and out the door to go play. But she would very meticulously not get all upset with us, So it was
Probably waiting for y'all to leave.
Doris Roby was not my teacher, But I
She was
know
mine.
she had to be the best in the world.
She was.
She said
Doris
she
Roby.
had to teach first grade one year. Not that she was trained to, but they had to have her.
And
And she said she worried over those kids. She just knew she was going to ruin them. And she kept track of those children until they got out of high school to be sure they made it. She was so dedicated to her job and doing
They
it
loved
right.
her.
And when that class had their class reunion here, they invariably made sure Doris Roby was here
And those
at their
kids came get to see her.
reunion. Yes, they did. But what you got to thinking about, have you been renamed?
Oh,
No.
gosh, have I?
My nickname was.
Renamed. You see, God, where all this thing's going, he renamed Peter. I love what Mark called him, Rocky.
Yeah. Wait a minute. That wasn't it, was it?
But have you ever had your name changed?
Yeah, I
Marriage.
was 21 years old before I found out my legal name was Yoriko Mezawa Sims.
I beg your pardon?
Yeah.
My legal name, I was 21 years old. I'd never had to have a birth certificate up until I got married. And I tried to get a birth certificate, and they said, we don't have one for Lola Jane Sims. Did you ever have another name? Well, I knew what it was, but Mom and Daddy said they legally changed it. And so that's when I found out that my legal name is Yoriko Umezawa Sims.
Oh my goodness.
My dad was a Sims. Umezawa. That's my mother's.
So but you've got your Italian, your Japanese heritage, and you've got your Native American heritage all in your name.
The Native American isn't
I mean, but your middle name. All right, what was your first name again?
my first name is Yoriko.
That comes from-
trustworthy. It's Japanese.
That's Japanese. All right, what's the second name?
Umezawa is my mother's family name.
Which was,
Japanese.
Japanese,
Okay.
yeah.
all right.
Because
But
Daddy was in a hospital when I was born, and Mama didn't know any American names other than Lowell Millard Sims. My daddy. And
So
she named me Yoriko Mezawa Sims.
so where did Lola come from?
Oh, now that's an even longer story. My daddy's name is Lowell Millard Sims.
Okay,
My grandmother's name is Mary Jane.
okay.
So he decided when he got out of the hospital that they were going to legally change my name to Lola Jane Sims. And he said he'd sent in the paperwork, and they started calling me Lola Jane. But I already had a passport under Yoriko Mezawa because we were coming back to the States. And so when I got baptized, when I joined the church at 12, I had a baptismal certificate, and that's all you needed to get into high school and get into college. Well, in college, all you needed was your high school
Grades.
your
Transcript.
Yeah, your transcript. And so I went through life thinking my name was Lola Jane Sims. And then when I went to get married, they said, no, we don't have you. And you got to get married as Yoriko Mezawa Sims. So it takes 2 lines on my marriage.
Yeah.
Yoriko Mezawa Sims.
Well, you were sort of like me. I used Bob Marble before I ever was illegally, and my name changed to Marble. I was in school, and my records there showed me, but it didn't occur until the judge approved it in court. You are now Robert Marble rather than Robert Turpin. So it was a strange change of names that you have.
Yeah, well, Lola Jane has a high school diploma and a bachelor's degree, and Yoriko has a master's. And a retirement plan.
Well, think about that. What do you think happened to Simon when God said, "I'll call you Peter because you're going to be the rock of my church"? All right, you're going to be. He had to be shocked. All right, but
It's hard getting used to a new name.
well, all right, and Saul became Paul. All right, and Jacob became Israel.
That always baffled me why
Yeah.
everybody was renamed.
Yeah,
Well,
I didn't
and you go
understand
back
that.
and as you read what Mark was writing about here, God changed the name of the places
Yes.
to identify with what transpired there.
Yeah.
You know, and that to me was interesting in a lot of ways. When you get into that point, it says, if God were to change your name, what would he call you now?
Oh, I think there's anything for a procrastinator.
Procrastinator.
Oh, there's probably a nickname or something.
It's against God to be a procrastinator. Because you're wasting his time.
Yeah.
If I said Sin City, everybody knows where that is.
But didn't Little Rock get named Little Rock for something
A
that
rock.
guys floating in? and
Yes.
said, "Here's
Well,
a rock"?
that was, that was La Petite Rocher.
Yeah.
In other words, that's where the French trappers and traders landed. And you go down there, you can go down and find the rock right there where they tied up. And so, yeah, that
Or
was
what it was before.
that was what it was. But I don't know what it was before either.
I'm not
The
sure
other
it was
side
anything
named
before,
first.
was it?
North Little Rock, there was a big rock.
Yeah,
That's how they
that's that big
identified
rock
that
is
curve.
over on there.
Yeah, the big rock, and so then the other side, there was a little
Little
rock.
Rock.
where they-
But that's not the name that people in Little Rock gave to North Little Rock.
No, it
Well,
isn't.
Argenta.
Dogtown.
Because there were silver mines in there.
Yeah, there was a silver mine in that area, and that's where the Argenta came
Yeah.
from. But
They found silver when they put the freeway through by the zoo, but it wasn't enough to mine.
do you remember when they were putting?
They are.
How things get changed and so forth. You remember when they were putting I-40 through right there at Far City at the river? They had to
Yeah.
delay it because when they started digging, they found mastodon bones
Yeah.
there, and they had to have the archaeologists from university to come in and take all that before they could even proceed further with all that.
Now, is it Thailand that's Myanmar now? What is Myanmar? I mean, that's
Well, when I was a kid growing up, it was Siam, and then it became Thailand, and then now it is a new name. I don't know.
It's Myanmar. I mean,
Yeah, I think you're right. Myanmar or something like that.
I don't know.
I don't know.
So things are changing, but here was God gave the change of the names of all these places, and it was interesting to me. Massa and Meribah, that means quarrel, where you quarreled, and also where they were tested, and then you wind up to Taberah, which was fire, and all those things, and then Kibroth was where they were greedy, where they were. I got to reading. I don't know if you did or not, but I got to reading and finding more about it in the book of Numbers and also in the book of Exodus than what Deuteronomy tells us. Because reason it became greedy, and he talks about it, was, and the book of Numbers goes into more detail on it, and it was quail everywhere.
Yeah.
And they were gorging themselves on eating, and they became greedy and they became covetous, and then, and have you ever seen that happen?
Yeah.
Yeah, potlucks.
My dog.
Potluck. That's tonight at 5:30. So what it is the glutton table, right? Is that right? But anyway, but what was your thoughts about this when you think about it? When I think about it, in the quarrel and the test, they were quarreling, and can you imagine what happened to Moses? They were constantly at him, and then Moses, it doesn't tell us in Deuteronomy much about it, but you go back and read in Exodus and read Numbers, you find this particular episode that they were on Moses' case, big time. And he says, God, if you don't get us water, I don't know if I can control them, all right? And so God told him to go, all right? He told him to go to the rock, take the people there, and ask for the water. Well, in one book one of them says, tap it one time. Doesn't say that in the book of Numbers. It says you were supposed to ask for the water. Well, in his anger with the people, constantly bickering and carrying on and stuff, and he had the elders with him, all right? He was so angry, he says, and we will give you water. Well, first off, it wasn't we, it was God, all right? So Moses messed up there. And then he hit the rock twice with the rod that parted the Red Sea. And God says, okay, Moses, they got water, but you're not going to get in the promised land because you didn't obey. And think about that when I was thinking of it. Because how many of you are from the country that had a cistern?
I know what it is. Never had it.
You never had a cistern?
We had a well.
Well, we had a well, but the cistern we had the well, but our cousins didn't have the wells because we had a dairy farm and they didn't. They were farmers, but they had a cistern. And I remember going down in that thing, cleaning it out, assisting my cousins cleaning out the cistern, all right? And it was a big, it was deep, well, I guess about that deep in there. and it was huge. And all the, you know where they got their water from?
Right?
Right?
Rain running off the house.
Oh, the house.
And they had a screen over the opening so that it wouldn't catch all the other stuff in it. But that was cisterns were there, and they were cisterns dug all over. If you read the Bible, they call them wells in a lot of places, but they were cisterns that were dug, and they was there. Jordan had a place up out from El Paso, Arkansas, and in there was a dug well. You could see the water to the bottom, and it wasn't very big around. I don't know how they did it, but it had stones laid all the way up, and it was a well made out of stones. But I thought, well, there has to be a small guy putting this thing together. But it was there. So they had cisterns everywhere, and it was part of the water. But Moses was in the center of anger. Can you imagine his anger?
Yeah.
Have you ever had people irritate you so badly that you want, as I said, I would rather bite a grizzly bear in the backside than have to deal with these people? Because it would get that way, all right?
Moses being called to do that job was almost like a penance.
Yeah, but then the amazing thing, I'm with you there. I don't know if God had it as a penance, but God had Moses there for a reason, and he was there to get the generation of rest into the promised land. And he was giving them this information about what the quarrel and the test and the fire and the greediness and all, trying to inspire them. He reminded them of what not to do. In other words, for 40 years that had been going on by the generation test, all right? And so what he was trying to do is they would remind not how they will repeat what their ancestors had done. And they had to avoid that attitude. It's not easy at times, is it?
No.
You know, quarrels get on us. We have things that just spurs us, and all of a sudden we react. And they were children. This generation rest was the children of a very rebellious group of folks. Now, imagine what they saw growing up. And when you think of that sort of thing, his family, as Mark has written here, their generation that preceded them was disrespectful for God. They were constantly griping at God. And it makes me wonder, as I read in Exodus and in Numbers and in Deuteronomy, the episodes that describe all of this, it's hard how they ever came to be generation rest. How did it get there? Well, they got there because of Moses. Moses was there. God could have zapped them, but he wanted to do what he could and bring them there. And the wonderful thing is, as what Mark has written here, is the fact being is that, Moses was there to remind them. He was there. And they refused to follow. And I can imagine all his anger that was building up in him. But you got to realize the major issue that's there is the unbelief that they had. They knew about God, but they didn't believe God could do for them what they thought he could do. All right? And he couldn't do it. So it might be that that we looked everywhere. But to look to God for help, that's where we are. That's what we're doing. That's what we're trying to do ourselves, for help and for guidance in our lives. And that's why there was the Massas, and there was the Meribobs, and there was the Tabaros, and there was the Kibroth, that were all the cities and what happened there and why God walked them through it. I got a whole group of things you might want to read. If you get a chance to go home, I want you to read Psalms 81, 6 through 12. Just read it along this line. We're dealing with this third question. And also Psalms 95, verse 8. And then I'm going to put you on another one, Psalms 106, verses 13 through 20. And then you can read the whole third chapter of Hebrews, and you will get some insight into what's all of this is going. But I laughed about this as he was going. Do you like meatloaf?
Not soggy. No.
Not soggy. I'm told I make a good one, but I don't like it.
Well, what was funny was one of their children didn't like the pepper in it, the green pepper that was in it.
Green peppers in it.
But you're like Our son dated a young lady once that she didn't eat anything green.
I married one.
I married one, yeah, about the same.
Would eat green?
They didn't want me green.
Well, almost. He didn't like broccoli. He quit eating
Salad.
broccoli rice casserole when he found out it had broccoli in it because his mother made it and he loved it. It was frozen broccoli, so you know how it comes apart.
Yeah.
He didn't realize the little green things in there were broccoli. That is the
Speaking of
stupidest
that,
reason I've ever heard to stop eating.
doesn't the broccoli casserole have mushrooms in it?
Yeah, he didn't like those either.
Well, we have a daughter that she would get through eating, Joy would bake it, and on the side of her plate would be every chip of a marshmallow on the side of her. She had moved them over with her fork, And I love them,
He didn't like the texture. He said it was like biting a piece of rubber.
Amen.
Explain that.
Ate 'em.
Explain that to me. We have a granddaughter that said, "Oh, I don't eat that because I don't like the consistency of it."
Well, me too. I'm her.
Now, explain to me and to God, what's the consistency?
Well, it feels in
It's
your
the
mouth.
texture of it. I wouldn't eat Jell-O because, pardon me telling you this, because to me it felt like snot in my mouth.
I never thought of that.
I mean, it was flicking it. I would not, I didn't, and I love Jell-O now, but I wouldn't eat it until I was about 15, 16 years old. And
But but did you ever have anything in your house that became a meatloaf sink?
Oh, no, like that.
That's what they named that sink. When they made the child go back and pick it up out of the sink and eat,
no,
clean off their plate. You didn't read that?
I did
Yeah, I
read
read
that.
that, but I forgot about meatloaf sink. I forgot that.
The meatloaf sink, and so that from that day on, that sink became known. I wondered if they ever moved to a new house, did they have a
Every sink.
meatloaf sink in that house too?
And the reason it was named that, the kids never let them forget. it.
That-
Well, of course not.
Well, that was horrible.
Yes,
I mean,
and they never let
That was
You
Do
see,
you know how many
that's where
germs are in the sink?
Yes, I do.
That's the same thing as why he renamed them, so it would be
First
pertinent to
start.
what happened to them there.
That's right.
Rather than a name that was there
City
before.
government.
Historically.
Didn't mean
But-
anything.
But don't you see that that's where Moses was with this generation of Israelites? Because their whole family, they had come through a life that didn't like the consistency of what they were getting. All right, that was the word for it. And all of a sudden, when they did get it, I laughed what he said there on page that we was reading about the greedy part, where he said that he was quoting from Numbers 11:31 through 34. And the very end of it says, because they buried people who had been greedy. Well, that's the ESV version, the English Standard Version of the Bible. But the NIV, which a lot of people have, guess what it ends up? Buried those that craved other food.
That what?
Craved
Great.
other food.
Other than what you have.
So in other words, it was beyond food. God was jumping on them because they lusted and had all this sort of stuff going on. And so that was their way of saying what was happening, but they called it craved other food. And that was, and so they were talking, when I got to looking and doing some more search on it, that was involved with addictions and things that they were doing that God says
Sinfulness.
is sinfulness. And so that was in that part of it. So, but anyway, I was just curious if you'd seen that or not. But Moses is at the center of all their anger. That's the only person they can get angry with, right?
Right.
Well, of course, we can get angry at God and we can shake our fist. But there's like Lee Trevino says, don't pick off with an iron in your hand and wave it in the air, because he got hit by lightning. He was holding his iron on the golf course and it hit him, knocked him down. But anyway,
Yeah.
some problems can absolutely be solved only by prayer. And that's what I think Mark is guiding us toward. And as we look at this, we should make a determined effort. That's what Moses was talking to this generation. Rest. You've got to make an effort and you've got to pray to God. And when we feel like complaining, you ever felt that way?
Yeah.
And complaining only does what for us? It raises our level of stress and anxiety when we start that. And so, what happens to you when you pray? That's right. You're right. You sort of quiet. Everything becomes quiet. You sort of settle down. It's sort of. I think of it as like what happens when the ebb tide starts. Have you ever seen the ebb tide move everything back and everything gets calm? And that's what I think about. And it prepares us. The other thing I think about is most of us pray, but it also means that we need to shut up and listen.
Yeah.
You know, we throw that out there. But see, that's where Moses was with this generation rest. They didn't want to listen. And so God says to Moses, you've got to get their attention, or I will. And he says, and I will take care of them. As a matter of fact, God even told Moses he would destroy them. And Moses, in prayer with God, prayed, please don't, and don't do this. And God says, well, look at them there. And did your Bible, when you read it, I was reading this and it cracked me up. There's a couple of places that have it listed as they were in the wilderness of sin for 40 years. Well, another Bible version calls it the desert of sin. All right. But when you look at it, and then there was Exodus 17:1, we implant into the minds of, Moses was there to give them what had transpired, why the places were all renamed, and to implant in their minds that God was leading them, all right, and inspire them and get them ready to go. And, I get to thinking of, here they were saying, we'd rather be back in slavery. Well, it's hard for me to grasp. I don't know if it is for you, but I've read it many times. They were in slavery for 400 years. When you think of this, and here they are, and this is where we start out in the book of Genesis, and we go into Exodus and into Numbers in their movement that they made. They wanted to go back. Would you want to go back into slavery?
I don't think so.
They were used to it. I mean, we
That's what they
become so
knew.
complacent.
Okay, that's the word, yes.
Yeah, that it's like a stupid knee. It itches all the time. I'm getting to where I'm actually used to it itching all the time. I just expect it to itch.
That's what you know.
That's what I've known for about the last however many weeks it's been.
But what he was trying to tell them, you need to remember these things occurred and don't repeat them.
Yeah.
And if you want to get into the promised land, and they complained, the Anakites were big and tall, and they came after them and they whipped them, all right? And we talked about Rephidim, all right? You read about that part of Rephidim, where they actually had the battle and they beat them off and everything. But they didn't want to contend. You see, he was dealing with them being greedy.
Well, they even complained about the manna.
The manna,
Yeah, I mean.
But they didn't like that because it's the same taste every day.
Yeah, there they were starving. God gave them food, and they didn't like it because it wasn't tasty.
Yeah.
I mean, that's when my kids come in and go, oh, look the way this tastes. Well, at least you got food on your plate. I'll go back to mom going, there's millions of people starving to death.
You remember the old...
Romania.
Yeah, but you remember Jerry Clowers? Y'all remember the comedian?
Yeah.
And he talked about his mother saying, she had slick okra, which I love. I like slick okra. But his mother would say, you got to eat that, Jerry, because look at all the poor children in China. And he said, I'd like to give them this whole bowl. He said it was even bad. He said it was so slick, I would throw it out and the dog swallowed it before he realized what he had. And so there was a consistency. All right, and that was the situation they were running into. They were griping at God about all of this. They didn't like the food. They didn't. And then when he gave them all the quail, what did they do? They stuffed and gourded themselves.
Sick on it.
Rather than, it's sort of like, how many times have you seen movies and they were getting somebody that has been in the desert. They found them and they want water immediately, but they have to make them just take sips. You can't do it. And that's the same thing with starvation. I was in ICU for 12 days some time back. Y'all remember all that. When I came out, I weighed quite a bit less than what I weighed in there.
Not a good
And my
way to lose.
stomach had done this, all right, because I was being fed on IVs. All right, there was no food going into my mouth. And everything shrunk. Well, do you realize what it takes to get your stomach to... Can you imagine if I'd have gourded myself? I'd have been sick. I'd have been like they were. I would have been up chucking as they were. It didn't call it that, but in essence, it's what it says it is. So we think about that, but we get greedy and we get covetous and that sort of thing that he was dealing with. He says you can't have that. You got to, it reveals. I was interested in what I read in Kibroth, which is Hatter-Taurus. It revealed their hearts. Think about that. Here they were. Their hearts were being revealed and let them know. And so that's what happened there at Kibroth, right? They ultimately revealed what was in the hearts of the people. In other words, what was really in their hearts was their greed and all that was there. It was revealed. And in their hearts was not a desire to honor God or even help their neighbor. I mean, they were competing with each other. They were greedy. What you got, I want. And it's like people say, what's mine is mine and what's yours is mine. We have that attitude. We still have it today. But it was, they were ungrateful. They were, as Mark wrote in his book, they were wishing and craving to the point of obsession. And the result is that a little more would not satisfy them. And we have that there. So it lines up question 5. Did you get that question? Which place name related most to you? Of all the places, all right, you had quarrels, you had tests, you had fire, you had greediness.
That one.
Do what?
You said greediness.
Yeah.
I said that one.
I said probably greedy.
Well, it's sort of like he was talking about smelling the barbecue trigger.
Oh my.
I can be in the back studying and Joe will be cooking and the aroma will come into my study. And guess what? I'm ready to go eat.
Yes. Oh, it's going to take another 2 hours.
Or have you driven by someplace and the aroma from the restaurant
barbecue
is out into the streets and all of a sudden you hadn't thought about being hungry, but you are. And so that's where we are. And we have to resist them. And so really and truly, I like what he said. God is training them to pray before a meal and give thanks. Joe and I were watching a movie last night, and it wasn't so much praying before their meal, but a mother and a son were having their prayers every night as she was tucking them into bed. And it was a ritual, the way they did their hands, the way they prayed. And so it became that. And that's what happens with us at a meal, all right? When if you'll come here tonight and somebody says, okay, Pastor, it's time for you to bless this and so we can eat. And so before everybody goes, so that's there. But, so we look at that and, I was amazed that he went on to say on the next to the last page in this chapter here, where we're talking about question 6, where it was really saying to us, what is an action you or your family can do to be more grateful? But we'll get to thinking about the work of God in it. And I wrote my article this week about what transpired with the eclipse. It's on the newsletter that you'll be getting this week. But anyway, think of that. All right. Are we aware? Are we attentive? What's around us? Are we attentive to what God has created for us? Can we look at the logarithmic curve that we see in space? A lot of the nebulas are there. They're in that. You can look at the bottom of a pine cone. You can look in different places, and that logarithmic curve is in every one of the creations.
Fibonacci.
Do what?
Fibonacci.
Fibonacci. That's right. And it's there. Where'd it come from?
Yeah, we know.
How did we get it? We finally God gave us the knowledge to know that that's what it is. Fibonacci was right. All right, this is the curve, and this is the equation for it. But I'm amazed at all that. Do we really grasp that? Do we stop and become aware that, hey, we got to see an eclipse, all right? Now, think about what transpired mathematically in that moment.
Just knowing that far ahead that it's going to happen.
And we know that it's not going to come again
Yeah.
for 40 years.
Yeah.
And I won't be around, but you
No,
know.
I probably won't either.
But can you imagine? Somebody says, well, the sun, and I wrote in my article this week how big the sun is and how far away it is, how long it takes the rays to get here, that sort of thing I wrote in it. But we don't really think about that at times. But when you were standing there and it started getting dark, did you realize it became cooler?
Oh, yeah.
And there was a breeze blowing, all right?
Yes.
Now, we think of that. But think about, here's Earth. Here's the moon, which is smaller than we are. And then here's the sun that is how many times? We can put more than 1 million Earths into that sun, all right? But it was all set up, and it came perfectly. And the moon literally blocked out the sun because of this equation that occurs. And you think about that. And I get thinking, just happened.
Yeah, that's what gets me is that I can figure it out.
How did you get there? And so that's it.
The
And
thing
so,
that gets me is people figured it out who hadn't even figured out the wheel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really?
They did.
The Mayans
That's
knew
right.
knew the eclipses and everything. They hadn't even invented the
The
wheel.
wheel.
They're still dragging stuff around on the ground.
and we're constantly finding from the Mayas and from the Incas and all of those, we're finding mathematical equations that were there and things that they were able to do. Well, think about it. He writes in here that the Jews in captivity helped build the pyramids.
It's pretty amazing.
I have in my own, well, not to influence you, in my own mind, how did it occur?
God had his hands.
I mean, they're finding in South America, and they found in Mexico and the Yucatan, they're finding things built. How did they get built? How did those humongous stones get placed the way they were placed?
I mean, that has always amazed me that they can, I mean, you know, they think they roll them on these things, you know, blah, blah, blah. But still, I mean, I tried to roll stuff around and place it, and I wasn't doing that good, and it was a lot smaller than the blocks they were moving.
You got to realize, one of the great 7 wonders of the world is the Great Pyramid.
Right.
It's still there.
It is.
Now, some of the other wonders of the world have deteriorated, but it hasn't. And how it was made and everything in that. When I get to thinking and wondering about that, you know,
Aliens.
God was at work in creation. I mean, Mark didn't make a major statement here, but he did, you know, and that's why you and I can know the exact time the sun will rise, which I wrote in my thing about it. It really doesn't rise. I know the earth rotates and it doesn't, but how many people get up and see the splendor of a sunrise? Oh, I understand you do. But a lot of people don't. What do you remember the long trailer with Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball? And the trailer broke down and they were out there and they had to be woke up at daylight and Lucy says, well, that's spectacular. Why don't they come at noon so everybody can see it? And so when you think of these things in around us and where we are and what we're doing, God has said, and we know all of this, but our lives, Mark is correct when he wrote in here and says, our lives are not random. I've dealt with young people who felt taken advantage of, or that nobody loves them, that I'm an accident, this sort of stuff. And there really isn't. Nothing, we're not here to random. It came about. Of course, you got to realize sometimes we screw up, but God can take our screw ups and make a marvelous situation out of it. Like that sixth grader that you heard, and the teacher that developed that sixth grader, or like the unruly boys that the teacher thought this was their IQ, and she thought of them that way, and she think of it. And that's what we have to do and what we have to look at. Our lives are not random. And if anyone tells you differently, I love what he says here.
Yeah, me too.
Don't believe a word of it. And that's the title of this chapter. Don't believe a word of it. And so, and I like what he says. But the marvelous thing is, Generation Rest didn't do what he says. Walk away.
Yeah, that's good.
They walked in. They didn't walk away. So that's it. Thoughts?
I remember an overnight with a friend. I was probably 10, 11, 12, at a friend's house. You did that, sleepovers. And the mother fixed a meal, and I ate every bit of it with a dream of complaining. And I went home and I said, Mom, Miss Cox served the best asparagus, best thing. It was an asparagus casserole. And you ought to get that recipe from her because it was so good. And my mother said, do you know how many times I have made that asparagus casserole and you wouldn't touch it? But why I would sit there and eat it, for somebody else.
Peer pressure.
Well, yeah, you do that, but you also get to the point is that, there comes a time when the chickens come home to roost.
And I love it to this day. I make it anytime.
Well, I'm going to tell you something about that. As a sidebar, I never ate asparagus because we didn't have it on the farm. We didn't have
We
it
did.
We did.
until I dated that girl, and her mother fixed asparagus and ham with cream cheese over the top, with cheese over it,
Yeah.
over a slice of bread. To this day, I can just take asparagus and eat it. I like it thin. I don't want it the big thick ones,
Right.
and I love it. But I never had it as a kid growing up.
Well, now, some of the big thick ones, we didn't have that, we had the little thin stuff, but we had a big pile of it in the corner of the garden. And that was, oh my gosh, you couldn't wait to see it start coming up. And Mom would make us wait until it got up, 'cause I wanted to cut it when it was about this tall.
Well, the only one that we had growing up in the garden like that was garlic over in the corner.
We had that too.
I
Oh,
felt
that was-
if it was a great gardener every year, he grew everything. But he said that they would his wife would can it, especially asparagus, and give it to the neighbors, and they were all thrilled to have it. So one time, somehow their vacation came, and the asparagus was gonna be up, and it was gonna be
Top out and start flinging in.
yeah, you wouldn't want it. Well, he had told the neighbors before they went on this, I think they went to Hawaii maybe several weeks or something. And he said, y'all go in there and get that asparagus and, pick it and take all you want. They got back and not a one had been.
Oh, they didn't want the work?
If they had to pick it and fix it, you had to do with it.
We do have those traits too, don't we?
Yes, we do.
As long as you're giving it to me and you do the work, I love it. But I'm not going to go do it myself.
Yeah.
It's like Joy and I stopped at a produce stand earlier last week and got strawberries, but they had green beans, like you and I call pole beans. Remember them? And squash and tomatoes.
Now, where'd they come from this time of year?
It was over close to Faith Methodist Church on Market
No, I
Street.
know where to find.
Oh.
Where did they find them?
Where does
Well,
Green
the strawberries were Arkansas
Well,
berries.
that
Yeah.
I understood.
But the tomatoes were shipped in here from like Georgia or somewhere, which has already had their tomatoes. Ours is not up yet. We haven't had the tomato festival in Warren yet, so I don't think.
Potatoes.
And so,
I
Majors.
bought some tomato plants yesterday, and I got some that already had blooms on them.
oh, did you really? Oh, you'll have a
Probably
little.
Tractor Supply.
And I don't know about you, but I like green tomatoes sliced and fried.
Oh, fried. Oh my gosh.
Oh,
Mm.
Now they're as good as the movie.
Yeah, it is. It's cute.
So anyway, well, folks, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're having
Yeah.
fun with this, and we'll go to chapter 11 next week and see what goes.